A streak of lightning ripped across the night sky, illuminating the empty road for barely a second, but long enough for her to notice the figure stumbling in the downpour. Emily squinted through the windshield as the wipers fought against the sheets of rain, her tired hands tightening on the wheel of her beat-up car. Her little daughter, Lily, already frightened by the storm, clung to her seatbelt in the back, wide-eyed. Ahead of them, an old man in a soaked suit dragged his feet, one hand on his head, the other gripping a briefcase that looked far too heavy for him. Something in the way he staggered, as if the weight of the world were pulling him down, struck Emily deeper than she expected. She slowed the car, her heart pounding, sensing that fate had placed her at that exact spot for a reason she didn't yet understand. If you believe in kindness, second chances, and humanity still shining through dark nights, make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. It helps this channel reach more hearts just like yours. The rain intensified, hammering the roof of the car like thousands of tiny fists. Emily leaned out the window, letting the cold droplets sting her face as she called to the old man. He lifted his head slowly, startled, his gray hair plastered against his forehead. Emily could see exhaustion carved into his features, the kind that comes from more than just a long walk under bad weather. She didn't know him, had never seen him before, but she recognized that look. She had worn it many times herself since becoming a single mother at 24. Emily pushed the door open and stepped into the storm. Her clothes were instantly drenched, but she didn't care. She approached him carefully, sensing his hesitation, and urged him to come sit in the car before the cold got worse. The man tried to muster a polite refusal, insisting he would manage, but his shivering betrayed him. Gently but firmly, Emily helped him toward the car, guiding him with steady hands. When he finally lowered himself into the back seat beside Lily, the little girl stared at him curiously. He offered her a weak but genuine smile, and something in Lily's expression softened. Back on the road, Emily tried to drive slowly despite the storm. Her headlights barely penetrated the darkness, and puddles splashed up with every turn of the wheels. She asked the man where he lived, but he hesitated before giving her a vague direction toward a neighborhood on the far end of town. His voice trembled, not from the cold, but from something deeper. Emily didn't pry. She knew what it felt like to be holding back shattered pieces, afraid they'd fall if anyone looked too closely. For the entire drive, she could sense him watching her, grateful, weary, and strangely thoughtful. When they finally reached the address he had mentioned, Emily saw a small, modest house tucked behind an overgrown hedge. It didn't look lived in, at least not recently. The man thanked her quietly, stepping out into the rain once more. Before he closed the door, he paused as if wanting to say something else, but then simply nodded and disappeared into the shadows of the porch. Emily drove away with an odd heaviness in her chest. She didn't know why helping him felt different than the dozens of people she'd assisted before, neighbors who needed rides, co-workers stranded after late shifts, strangers whose cars had broken down. She always helped where she could. It was her nature. But with this man, something lingered, like a question waiting for its answer. That night, after putting Lily to bed and wringing the rainwater from her hair, Emily sat alone at the small kitchen table, staring at the unpaid bills stacked beneath a flickering light. She rubbed her temples and reminded herself that she'd managed this long. She could keep going. She had no choice. Still, the tiredness in her bones felt deeper than usual. As she finally drifted to sleep, she thought of the old man's trembling hands and wondered what burdens he carried home with him. The next morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. Emily hurried through her routine, packing Lily's tiny pink backpack, rushing through breakfast, tying her daughter's hair into two little pigtails. She was about to leave when she noticed a sleek black sedan parked in front of her house. Her stomach tightened. She had no idea who it belonged to, but she instinctively moved Lily behind her as she stepped outside. A sharply dressed man in his 40s approached her, holding an envelope. Behind him stood another man, younger, carrying a leather folder. Emily's first fear was that something had happened to the old man from the night before. Before she could speak, the suited man addressed her by name, explaining that he worked for Mr. Hargrove, the elderly gentleman she had helped in the rain. Emily's surprise deepened. She hadn't known his name, hadn't paired him with the imposing home the man now pointed to on a business card. Apparently, Mr. Hargrove was not simply an old man trudging alone in the rain. He was the long-retired founder of a once massive company, a man whose wealth had been featured in newspapers years ago. Emily struggled to make sense of it. His house last night hadn't seemed extravagant. The envelope was gently pressed into her hands before she could protest. The suited men bowed politely and returned to the sedan. Inside the house, Emily sat with trembling fingers as she opened the envelope. Her breath caught. It wasn't money, not at first. The letter inside was handwritten, the pen strokes slightly unsteady. He thanked her for her kindness, explaining that he had been walking alone that night after visiting a place filled with harsh memories. His late wife had lived her final years in a care center nearby, and he'd struggled with guilt ever since her passing. He had felt overwhelmingly alone until Emily stopped for him, a stranger with every reason not to. Her kindness reminded him of the goodness he once believed in but had long forgotten. And then, at the bottom of the letter, the sentence that made Emily drop it in disbelief. I would like to help you, just as you helped me. Beneath it was a check, large enough to wipe away every debt she had, pay her rent for years, and give Lily a safer, more stable future. Emily couldn't breathe. Her hands shook as she pressed them to her face, tears spilling down her cheeks. She didn't understand why someone would do this for her. She had helped because it was the right thing. Because someone had been alone in the rain, cold and weary. She hadn't expected anything, and she certainly hadn't expected this. Later that afternoon, as Emily sat outside watching Lily play in a patch of sunlight, she received another surprise. A small white car pulled up, and Mr. Hargrove himself stepped out, clean, neatly dressed, and walking more confidently than he had the night before. Emily hurried to meet him, her heart full of questions. He smiled gently and insisted he didn't want gratitude or repayment. Instead, he simply wanted to thank her in person and tell her more. They sat on the porch as he talked about the loneliness that had settled over his life since losing his wife. He admitted he had been wandering through the storms in more ways than one. But her simple act of stopping for him, showing concern without expecting anything, had awakened something inside him that he thought was gone. She reminded him that kindness still existed in the world. He wanted to honor his late wife's memory by helping someone who genuinely deserved it. Emily listened with quiet emotion, feeling a mix of disbelief and gratitude. She told him about her struggles, not in a way that begged sympathy, but simply because he asked sincerely. For the first time in a long time, she felt seen. Not as a burdened single mom scraping by, but as a person with strength, compassion, and worth. Over the next months, Mr. Hargrove became a regular presence in their lives. He visited often, bringing books for Lily, advice for Emily, and stories from his past that made them laugh. Emily never treated him like a savior or a source of wealth, she treated him like family, something he had longed for. In turn, he treated Emily and Lily with a tenderness that felt almost grandfatherly. Their lives transformed gradually, not just through financial relief but through companionship, hope, and renewed faith in humanity. Emily found a better job, moved into a safer home, and began saving for Lily's future. She no longer carried the same heaviness she once felt at night. Instead, she carried gratitude, and the quiet strength of knowing that a single act of kindness could change not just one life, but many. One evening, months later, as they all shared dinner on Emily's porch, the sky turned golden with sunset. Lily climbed onto Mr. Hargrove's lap, giggling, and he held her with gentle affection. Emily watched them with a warmth that filled her heart. The memory of that stormy night replayed in her mind, clearer now than ever. Fate had put her on that road. She had opened her door. And from that moment, everything changed. If this story touched your heart even a little, please like, comment, share, and subscribe. Your support helps us continue sharing meaningful stories like this one.